I thought testing people's character was simple until I sat in my modest Honda Civic outside the Golden Oak restaurant, adjusting my thrift store cardigan and slipping off my diamond tennis bracelet. Tonight, I would meet my son, Jake's new in-laws, as a struggling widow, barely scraping by, not as Minnie Richardson, founder of Richardson Tech Solutions, earning $35,000 monthly. I wanted to see how wealthy people truly treat those they consider beneath them. Little did I know the Worthington family had their own devastating secret that would shatter everything I believed about my son's marriage and force me to abandon my act to save his future. The restaurant's mahogany entrance doors felt heavier than usual as I pushed through them, clutching a worn purse I had borrowed from my housekeeper. The Golden Oak's crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across marble floors, and I could smell the aroma of expensive wine and grilled salmon floating through the dining room. My carefully chosen outfit consisted of a faded floral dress I had purchased at Goodwill that morning, scuffed brown shoes with worn heels, and a thin navy cardigan with a small hole near the left elbow. Jake stood up immediately when he spotted me, his familiar smile wavering slightly as he took in my appearance. At 28, my son had inherited his father's kind eyes and gentle demeanor, though tonight he seemed unusually tense. His wife, Sarah, a petite blonde kindergarten teacher with genuine warmth in her expression, rose gracefully beside him. "Mom, you made it," Jake said, giving me a careful hug as if afraid I might break. "Sorry, everyone, my mother had trouble finding parking. She's not used to downtown restaurants." I forced myself to look flustered and embarrassed. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry I'm late. That parking garage was so confusing and I got turned around twice trying to find this place. I hope I didn't keep anyone waiting." Sarah stepped forward with authentic kindness. "Please don't worry about it, Mrs. Richardson. We're just happy you could join us." She gestured toward the elegantly set table, where 3 other people sat watching our exchange with varying degrees of interest and judgment. Dr. Richard Worthington commanded attention even while seated. In his early 60s with silver hair perfectly styled and an expensive navy suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, he radiated authority and wealth. His handshake was firm but brief, as if prolonged contact might somehow diminish his status. "Mrs. Richardson, we've heard so much about you," he said with a smile that never reached his eyes. "Please call me Richard. This is my wife, Catherine." Catherine Worthington appeared to be in her late 50s with auburn hair styled in an elaborate updo and wearing a cream-colored silk blouse that complemented her emerald necklace. Her manicured fingers displayed multiple rings, including what appeared to be a 3-carat diamond engagement ring that caught the light with every gesture. "How lovely to finally meet you," Catherine said, though her gaze swept over my outfit with barely concealed disapproval. "Sarah has mentioned how resourceful you are." The third person at the table was Trevor, Sarah's older brother, who stood up with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to commanding boardrooms. At 30, he wore a charcoal gray suit with a Rolex that gleamed on his wrist. Beside him sat his pregnant wife, Amanda, a quiet brunette who seemed nervous and kept fidgeting with her napkin. Trevor Worthington. He introduced himself with a handshake that lasted exactly 3 seconds. "And this is my wife, Amanda. She's due in 4 months." "Congratulations," I said warmly, directing my comment to Amanda, who offered a shy smile in return. "Babies are such blessings. I remember when Jake was born, we could barely afford the hospital bills, but somehow we managed." Jake shifted uncomfortably beside me. "Mom, maybe we shouldn't talk about old financial problems." "Oh, nonsense." I continued settling into my chair and placing my worn purse on the floor beside me. "There's no shame in struggling. After your father passed, I learned to make every penny count. I clip coupons, shop at thrift stores, and I've gotten quite good at finding bargains." Dr. Richard leaned forward with what he probably considered benevolent interest. "That must be quite challenging managing on a fixed income. Have you considered applying for assistance programs? I know several social workers who help widows navigate the system." "That's very kind," I replied, lowering my eyes as if embarrassed by my circumstances. I've been looking into some programs, but the paperwork is so confusing. Sometimes I feel like I need a college degree just to understand the forms. Catherine's expression softened into what she likely believed was compassion. Well, we're fortunate to be in a position where we can help family members when they need it. Financial stability is so important for peace of mind. Sarah reached over and squeezed my hand gently. Jake's mom is incredibly strong. She raised him by herself and did an amazing job. I'm sure she did her best, Trevor said, though his tone suggested this wasn't necessarily a compliment. Single parenthood can be quite challenging, especially without proper financial planning. The waiter approached our table and I noticed how the Worthington family ordered without looking at prices, while Jake carefully studied the menu's right column. I asked for the cheapest item I could find, claiming I wasn't very hungry. "Are you sure?" Sarah asked with genuine concern. "The salmon here is wonderful." "Oh, I'm sure it is," I said quickly. "But I had a late lunch. Actually, it was more like an early dinner. I made a big pot of soup yesterday and I've been eating it for 3 meals a day. You know how it is when you make too much and don't want it to go to waste." Dr. Richard nodded knowingly. Food budgeting is certainly an art form. Catherine and I appreciate efficiency in all areas of life. As our conversation continued through appetizers, I carefully observed each family member's reactions to my apparent poverty. Dr. Richard offered unsolicited advice about managing limited resources and suggested I consider moving to a smaller apartment. Catherine recommended discount grocery stores and mentioned that some churches offered free clothing drives. Trevor made several comments about the importance of financial literacy, while Amanda remained largely silent, occasionally shooting worried glances between her husband and in-laws. Jake appeared increasingly embarrassed by my apparent circumstances, frequently apologizing for comments I made about struggling to pay utility bills or walking everywhere to save gas money. Sarah, however, consistently defended me and seemed genuinely concerned about my well-being. "Mrs. Richardson," Dr. Richard said during a pause in conversation, "I hope you won't take this the wrong way, but if you ever need medical care, I'd be happy to arrange something affordable. Preventive care is so important, especially for women your age." "That's incredibly generous," I responded, touched despite myself by what seemed like genuine concern. "I've been putting off a few checkups because of the cost." Catherine set down her wine glass and leaned forward conspiratorially. "You know there are some wonderful discount clothing stores downtown. Nothing wrong with looking your best on a budget. First impressions matter so much in today's world." Throughout the meal, I continued playing my role to perfection, mentioning how I had to choose between buying groceries and paying for cable television, ultimately deciding that basic channels were sufficient entertainment. I described my small apartment and how I had learned to repair things myself rather than hiring professionals. As dessert arrived, I excused myself to visit the restroom, but instead of heading toward the back of the restaurant, I lingered near the bar area where I could observe the table from a distance. What I witnessed made my blood run cold. Catherine was leaning close to Dr. Richard, whispering urgently while gesturing in my direction. Although I couldn't hear every word, I caught enough to understand the general sentiment. "We need to make sure Sarah knows what she's gotten herself into. This family will be a constant drain on our resources." Dr. Richard nodded grimly and responded with something about financial responsibility and protecting our daughter's future. Trevor joined the conversation, adding his own comments about how poor families always expect handouts and how Jake needed to step up if he wanted to be part of their family. Sarah looked uncomfortable with the direction of their discussion, but she remained silent, glancing nervously between her parents and the direction I had gone. Jake appeared oblivious to the whispered conversation focused on his chocolate cake. I returned to the table with a sick feeling in my stomach, but I maintained my confused, overwhelmed persona. Something told me this dinner had been orchestrated for reasons that had nothing to do with welcoming me into their family. The way Dr. Richard kept steering conversations toward financial topics and how Catherine seemed to be cataloging every detail of my apparent poverty suggested they were gathering information for some purpose I couldn't yet identify. As the evening progressed, I began to realize that my test of their character was revealing far more than simple snobbery or condescension. There was a calculated quality to their questions and comments that made my instincts scream warnings. Whatever the Worthington family was planning, it involved more than just expressing disapproval of their daughter's choice in husband. The climactic moment came as we waited for the check. Catherine smiled sweetly and said, "Well, this has been such a lovely evening. We should definitely do this again soon." In fact, Richard and I were just discussing some exciting family opportunities that we'd love to share with Jake and Sarah. Dr. Richard's eyes gleamed with something that definitely wasn't family affection as he nodded agreement. "Yes, we have some wonderful ideas for bringing our families closer together." I felt a chill of foreboding as I realized this dinner was just the beginning of something much larger and far more dangerous than a simple character test. The check had barely arrived when Dr. Richard cleared his throat with the authority of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "Before we part ways tonight, Catherine and I wanted to discuss something important with everyone." He straightened his tie and adopted the serious expression I imagined he used when delivering medical diagnoses. "We've been considering establishing what we call a family investment fund." Trevor immediately perked up, setting down his coffee cup with enthusiasm. "Dad, that's a fantastic idea. Amanda and I have been hoping you'd suggest something like this." "What exactly is a family investment fund?" Jake asked cautiously, though I could see the hopeful curiosity in his expression. Catherine leaned forward with the practiced charm of someone who had perfected the art of persuasion. "Well, it's quite simple, really. Each couple contributes a certain amount to a shared investment pool, and we use those combined resources to create wealth for the entire family. It's about building generational prosperity and securing our grandchildren's futures." Dr. Richard nodded approvingly. "Exactly. We're talking about real financial security, not just hoping things work out. The minimum contribution we're considering is $50,000 per couple." Sarah's face went pale, and I noticed her grip tighten on her water glass. Jake's jaw dropped slightly before he quickly attempted to compose himself. $50,000, he repeated slowly, as if testing how the words felt in his mouth. Now, I know that might sound like a significant amount. Dr. Richard continued with the patronizing tone of someone who had never worried about money. "But consider the returns. We're not talking about putting money in some low-yield savings account. This is about strategic investments in real estate, emerging technologies, and international markets." Trevor enthusiastically jumped into the conversation. "Jake, Amanda, and I already contributed $75,000 last month. The returns have been incredible. We're looking at potential gains of 20 to 30% annually." Amanda shifted uncomfortably beside her husband, but remained silent. I noticed her hands were trembling slightly as she reached for her napkin. I maintained my confused, overwhelmed expression while my mind raced. "I'm sorry," I said hesitantly. "But what exactly is an investment fund? I've never been very good with financial things." Catherine turned to me with the exaggerated patience of someone explaining basic concepts to a child. "Oh dear, it's really quite straightforward. You see, when wealthy families want to protect and grow their money, they pool their resources together. Think of it like a very sophisticated group savings account, except instead of earning tiny interest rates, the money is invested in opportunities that regular people never get access to. The key," Dr. Richard added, "is that everyone participates equally. It's about commitment to the family unit and shared prosperity. Each couple demonstrates their dedication by contributing the same amount." Jake cleared his throat nervously. "The thing is, Sarah and I have been saving for a house down payment. We've managed to save about $30,000, but $50,000 would be..." He trailed off, clearly struggling with how to phrase his limitations diplomatically. "Oh, that's perfectly understandable," Dr. Richard said with false sympathy. "Starting out can be challenging. Perhaps we could arrange some sort of payment plan. The important thing is making the commitment." Sarah finally found her voice. "Dad, we appreciate the offer, but $50,000 is a huge amount of money for us. That's more than Jake makes in a year." Sweetie, Catherine said with gentle condescension, that's exactly why this opportunity is so valuable. You need to start thinking beyond your current limitations. Wealthy families don't stay wealthy by playing it safe with small amounts. Trevor leaned forward aggressively. Look, Jake, I get that it's a stretch, but you need to consider what's at stake here. We're talking about Sarah's future, about your future children's security. Sometimes you have to take calculated risks to achieve real success. I watched my son's face carefully as the pressure mounted. His discomfort was obvious, but I could also see his desperate desire to prove himself worthy of this family that clearly considered themselves superior. Maybe we could start with a smaller amount, he suggested hopefully. Perhaps $25,000 and then add more later as our income improves. Dr. Richard's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Jake, I appreciate your position, but this isn't a negotiation. The fund requires equal participation from all family members. Anything less undermines the entire concept. But surely you understand our situation, Sarah pleaded with her parents. We're not trying to be difficult. We just don't have that kind of money available right now. That's where creative financing comes in, Catherine said brightly as if she had just solved world hunger. There are always options for motivated people. Second mortgages, personal loans, borrowing against future earnings. The key is having the vision to see beyond temporary constraints. I needed to gather more information, so I played into my naive persona. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm still confused about how this works. Who decides what to invest in, and what happens if the investments don't work out? Trevor answered with the confidence of someone who had clearly rehearsed these responses. That's the beauty of having Dad oversee everything. With his medical practice and business connections, he has access to investment opportunities that regular people never hear about. The risk is minimal because we're leveraging his professional network. And of course, Dr. Richard added smoothly, I personally guarantee every investment. If anything were to go wrong, which is highly unlikely, I would personally ensure that everyone's contributions are protected. Something about the way he delivered this guarantee made my instincts scream warnings. I decided to test their story with more innocent questions. This sounds wonderful. You must have a beautiful home with all this financial success. Catherine's smile became slightly strained. Well, we're currently renting while we renovate our permanent residence. It's actually quite smart from a tax perspective. The rental allows us to keep our investment capital liquid for better opportunities. That makes sense. I said, though my financial background told me this explanation was suspicious. Wealthy people didn't typically rent homes unless they were facing credit problems or cash flow issues. The point is, Dr. Richard continued refocusing the conversation. We need commitment from everyone by Friday. These investment opportunities don't wait for people to make up their minds. Jake looked increasingly desperate. Could we maybe discuss this privately and get back to you next week? I'm afraid not, Trevor interjected. We're looking at a time-sensitive situation. The longer we wait, the more we risk losing out on potential gains. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she looked between her family and her husband. I just don't understand why everything has to happen so quickly. Can't we take some time to think about this? Sweetie, Catherine said with false gentleness, successful people make decisive moves. Hesitation is what keeps poor families poor. I felt my protective instincts flare at the obvious manipulation, but I maintained my confused expression while my mind worked furiously. I excused myself again, claiming I needed some fresh air, but actually stepped outside to make a crucial phone call to my financial advisor. Marcus, it's Minnie. I need you to run a quick background check on Dr. Richard Worthington. He's a cardiologist here in town, and I need to know his real financial situation immediately. Within 10 minutes, Marcus called back with information that confirmed my worst suspicions. Dr. Richard Worthington had filed for bankruptcy protection on his medical practice 6 months ago. Catherine's interior design business had 3 active lawsuits from contractors demanding payment for completed work. Trevor had been recently demoted at his investment firm following complaints about questionable client recommendations. As I walked back toward the restaurant, my phone buzzed with a text from my private investigator friend. Initial search shows multiple red flags. This family is in serious financial trouble. We'll have complete report by morning. When I returned to the table, I could hear Dr. Richard speaking quietly but urgently into his phone near the restaurant's entrance. Yes, we'll have at least $50,000 by Wednesday. The son-in-law is desperate to impress us. His mother's clearly broke, so no help there. This should be easier than the last family we approached. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't about building family wealth or creating opportunities for grandchildren. The Worthington family was running a sophisticated con game, using Sarah's marriage as bait to extract money from Jake. They were counting on his love for their daughter and his desperation to prove himself worthy of their acceptance. I returned to my seat with my heart pounding, but I maintained my innocent, confused demeanor. The dinner that had started as my test of their character had become something far more dangerous. My son was being set up as the victim of a cruel financial scam, and the people orchestrating it were his own in-laws. As Dr. Richard returned to the table with a satisfied expression, I realized the evening's real purpose. They hadn't invited me to welcome me into their family. They had wanted to assess whether I might interfere with their plans or potentially provide additional resources they could exploit. Finding me apparently poor and powerless, they were now moving forward with confidence. But they had made one crucial miscalculation. They thought they were dealing with a naive, struggling widow and her desperate son. Instead, they had just revealed their entire scheme to someone with the resources and determination to destroy them completely. Dr. Richard returned to his seat with the satisfied expression of someone who had just secured a profitable business deal. Sorry about that interruption. Now where were we? He settled back into his chair and fixed Jake with an intense stare. Yes, we were discussing the investment timeline. Actually, Jake said hesitantly, I was hoping we could talk about this more gradually. Maybe start with a smaller commitment and work our way up as we get more comfortable with the process. Trevor shook his head with barely concealed impatience. Jake, that's not how successful investing works. You can't dip your toe in the water and expect to see real returns. This is about making a serious commitment to your family's future. Catherine nodded emphatically while adjusting her emerald necklace. Honey, we understand that $50,000 feels overwhelming right now, but consider this. Would you rather struggle for the next 20 years or make one bold move that changes everything? But what if we can't come up with that much? Sarah asked quietly, her voice barely audible over the restaurant's ambient noise. I mean, realistically, we'd have to borrow most of it. That's exactly what smart people do. Dr. Richard responded with the confidence of someone delivering medical facts. They leverage their future earnings to create wealth today. You could take out a second mortgage on your apartment, or there are personal loan options for people with steady employment. Jake shifted uncomfortably. The thing is, we don't own our apartment. We're renting, and my credit isn't great because of some medical bills from a few years ago. Medical bills. I interjected with genuine concern, staying in character. Oh, honey, you never told me about any medical problems. Are you okay? It's nothing serious, Mom. I just had some issues with insurance coverage when I switched jobs. Everything's fine now. Dr. Richard leaned forward with practiced sympathy. You know, Jake, those kinds of financial setbacks are exactly why families need to stick together. If you had been part of our investment fund back then, those medical bills would never have been a problem. That's so true, Catherine agreed. We've helped so many family members through difficult times. Trevor, remember when we helped your cousin Bradley with his business loan? Trevor nodded enthusiastically. Absolutely. Bradley was struggling with his restaurant and the family fund helped him expand. Now he owns 3 locations and he's one of our most grateful contributors. Amanda finally spoke up, her voice shaky. Actually, I thought Bradley's restaurant closed down last year. Didn't he have to file for bankruptcy? An awkward silence fell over the table. Trevor quickly recovered, waving his hand dismissively. That was a completely different situation. He made some poor management decisions that had nothing to do with our initial investment. The point is, we tried to help. I seized the opportunity to ask more innocent questions. This all sounds so complicated. How do you keep track of who owes what? Do you have paperwork and legal documents? Dr. Richard's smile became slightly strained. Well, we prefer to keep things informal within the family. Trust is more important than paperwork when you're dealing with people you love. But surely there must be some kind of record keeping, I pressed gently. I mean, if people are contributing thousands of dollars, shouldn't there be proper documentation? Catherine laughed lightly, but I detected nervousness beneath her cheerful tone. Oh my goodness, you sound just like our accountant. Always worried about paperwork and formalities. The beauty of family arrangements is that they're based on relationships, not contracts. Trevor jumped back into the conversation aggressively. Look, Jake, let's cut to the chase here. Sarah deserves security and stability. She grew up in a home where money wasn't a constant worry, where her parents could provide opportunities and experiences. Are you telling me you want her to give up that lifestyle? Sarah's face flushed with embarrassment. Trevor, that's not fair. I never asked for any of those things. You didn't have to ask, he shot back. That's what family provides. But now you're choosing to struggle instead of accepting help. It's not help if we can't afford it, Jake replied with growing frustration. Borrowing $50,000 isn't help, it's debt. Dr. Richard's expression hardened. Jake, let me be frank with you. Poor families stay poor because they're afraid to take risks. They're so focused on immediate security that they never build real wealth. Is that the future you want for Sarah? That's not what this is about, Jake protested. I want to provide for Sarah, but I also want to be realistic about what we can handle. Catherine reached across the table and patted Sarah's hand condescendingly. Sweetie, I know this is difficult, but sometimes we have to make hard choices. Your father and I didn't get where we are by playing it safe. I noticed Amanda had grown increasingly pale during this conversation. She kept glancing between Trevor and her in-laws with obvious distress. Finally, she whispered to me, Could I speak with you privately for a moment? Of course, dear, I replied, and we both excused ourselves from the table. In the ladies' room, Amanda's composure cracked completely. I'm so sorry, she said, tears streaming down her face. I can't keep pretending anymore. None of this is true. What do you mean? I asked gently, though I suspected I already knew the answer. The investment fund, Trevor's success, all of it. It's lies. She wiped her eyes with a tissue. Trevor lost his job 2 months ago. He was fired for borrowing money from client accounts. We're living on credit cards, and I've been covering his car payments with my savings. What about his parents' investments? Amanda laughed bitterly. What investments Dr. Richard's practice is being investigated for insurance fraud? Catherine hasn't had a real client in months. Her interior design business is actually her trying to sell furniture online to pay their rent. My heart sank as I realized the full scope of their deception. Amanda, does Sarah know any of this? No, they've been lying to her for months. They're terrified she'll find out because she's the only one in the family with a stable income and good credit. They've been planning this dinner for weeks, hoping to use her marriage to get money from Jake. Why are you telling me this? Amanda touched her pregnant belly protectively. Because I can't watch them destroy another family. They did this to my parents last year, convinced them to invest their retirement savings. My parents lost everything and now they're living in a trailer park. I felt a surge of rage at these people who were willing to destroy their own daughter's happiness for money. What can we do to stop this? I don't know, Amanda sobbed. Trevor threatens to leave me if I don't support the family story. With the baby coming, I can't afford to be on my own. But I can't watch them hurt Sarah and Jake either. We returned to the table to find the conversation had grown even more intense. Dr. Richard was speaking in the authoritative tone he probably used with difficult patients. Jake, I'm going to be very direct with you. Sarah could have married anyone. She chose you because she believed you had potential. Are you going to prove her wrong? Dad, please, Sarah pleaded. You're putting too much pressure on him. Pressure creates diamonds, sweetheart, Catherine replied smoothly. Jake needs to understand that being part of this family comes with certain expectations. Trevor pulled out his phone and showed Jake a banking app. Look, here's proof of our returns from the fund. 15% growth in just 2 months. Do you really want to pass up this opportunity? I leaned over to look at the screen using my apparent confusion to get a closer view. Even with my limited ability to see details, something about the numbers looked suspicious. The account names were generic and the transaction dates seemed inconsistent. This is all happening so fast, Jake said weakly. Could we at least have until Monday to think about it? These opportunities don't wait for people to make up their minds. Dr. Richard snapped his friendly facade slipping. We have commitments to meet, and frankly, your hesitation is starting to concern me. What do you mean by that? Sarah asked, alarm creeping into her voice. Catherine's smile became sharp and predatory. Well, sweetheart, commitment is a two-way street. We're offering Jake an incredible opportunity to prove himself worthy of our family, but if he's not interested in rising to that level, the implication hung in the air like a threat. Trevor nodded agreement. Sarah deserves someone who's willing to fight for her future, not someone who makes excuses about why he can't succeed. I watched my son's face crumble under the psychological pressure. These people were systematically destroying his confidence while positioning themselves as the solution to problems they were creating. It was emotional manipulation at its most cruel and calculated. Amanda caught my eye and mouthed, "I'm sorry," before looking away. Sarah was crying quietly, torn between loyalty to her family and protection of the man she loved. Jake looked defeated, overwhelmed by demands he couldn't meet and implications he didn't fully understand. Dr. Richard pulled out an official-looking document folder. I took the liberty of bringing some preliminary paperwork just in case you decided to move forward tonight. All we need are signatures and bank account information. Tonight? Jake asked in shock. I thought we were just discussing possibilities. Successful people strike while the iron is hot, Trevor replied coldly. Hesitation is the enemy of prosperity. As Dr. Richard spread loan applications and investment agreements across the table, I realized we had reached the point of no return. These people weren't going to accept polite refusals or requests for more time. They were going to continue pressuring Jake until he either signed their papers or they found a way to blame him for destroying Sarah's happiness. But they had made one crucial mistake. They thought they were dealing with a powerless family with no options and no resources. They had no idea that the confused, struggling widow sitting across from them was actually conducting her own investigation and preparing her own counterattack. As Jake reached reluctantly for a pen, I made a decision that would change everything. It was time to stop observing and start acting. "Oh my," I said, suddenly fumbling in my purse with apparent distress. "I just remembered I need to call my caseworker before 9 o'clock or I'll miss my appointment tomorrow. Would it be terribly rude if I stepped outside for just a moment?" "Of course not," Sarah said kindly, though she looked relieved at any delay in the signing process. "Take all the time you need." I gathered my worn purse and walked toward the restaurant's entrance with the shuffling gait of someone overwhelmed by circumstances beyond her control. Once outside, however, my demeanor changed completely. I pulled out my smartphone and began making a series of strategic calls that would determine the fate of everyone still seated at that table. My first call was to Marcus, my financial advisor. "I need you to run comprehensive background checks on the entire Worthington family immediately. Credit reports, bankruptcy filings, criminal records, everything you can access legally. This is urgent." "Consider it done," Marcus replied. "I'll have preliminary results within an hour and complete documentation by morning." Next, I contacted my private investigator, Helen Wong, who specialized in financial crimes. "Helen, I need you to research a family that may be running investment scams. The Worthington family here in town. Dr. Richard Worthington, his wife Catherine, and their son Trevor." "Investment scams targeting family members?" Helen asked. "That's becoming increasingly common. I'll start digging immediately." My third call was to my attorney, James Patterson, who had handled corporate fraud cases for 20 years. "James, I may need your expertise very soon. I'm documenting what appears to be a family-based financial fraud scheme. Can you be available tomorrow morning?" "Absolutely. Are you in immediate danger?" "Not physical danger, but they're pressuring my son to sign loan documents tonight. I'm going to try to delay things, but I may need you to intervene." As I spoke with James, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from Marcus. "Minnie, you're not going to believe what I've found already. Dr. Richard Worthington filed for bankruptcy protection 6 months ago. His medical practice owes over $200,000 in malpractice settlements." "What about his wife?" "Catherine Worthington has a gambling problem. Casino records show she's lost over $30,000 in the past 6 months alone. Her interior design business is actually just her selling furniture online to cover debts. And their son, Trevor—" Marcus's voice grew grim. "Trevor was fired from his investment firm 3 weeks ago for embezzling client funds. He's currently under investigation and facing potential criminal charges. The family is completely bankrupt, Minnie. They're living on borrowed time and other people's money." I felt my suspicions confirmed with sickening clarity. "Marcus, I need you to research their previous victims. Amanda mentioned they scammed her parents last year. I'll trace all their financial connections and get back to you within the hour." Helen called back as I was finishing with Marcus. "I've found preliminary evidence of at least 3 other families who've been approached with similar investment opportunities by the Worthingtons in the past 18 months. 2 families lost their entire savings, and 1 elderly couple was forced to sell their home. Do we have documented proof?" "I'm working on it. 1 family filed a police report, but they didn't have enough evidence for charges to stick. The Worthingtons are careful to keep everything looking legitimate on the surface." Armed with this information, I returned to the restaurant with a heavy heart but a clear plan. As I approached our table, I could see that the pressure campaign had intensified. Jake was holding a pen while Dr. Richard pointed to signature lines on multiple documents. Sarah was crying openly, and Amanda looked like she might be sick. "I'm so sorry for the delay," I said, slipping back into my confused, apologetic persona. "The caseworker was very concerned about some paperwork I need to file. Apparently, there are new regulations about reporting financial changes." Dr. Richard looked up with mild irritation. "Financial changes? Well, it's probably nothing important," I said with feigned embarrassment. "Something about inheritance distributions and tax implications. I don't really understand most of it." Catherine's expression sharpened with interest. "Inheritance? You didn't mention anything about an inheritance earlier." I appeared flustered. "Oh, I probably shouldn't even bring it up. It's all very confusing, and the lawyers use so many big words. Apparently, my late husband had some investments I didn't know about." Trevor leaned forward aggressively. "What kind of investments?" "I honestly don't understand most of it." I continued playing my role perfectly. "Something about technology companies and real estate partnerships. The lawyer keeps calling about asset distributions and quarterly dividends, but I keep telling him he must have the wrong person." Jake stared at me in confusion. "Mom, you never mentioned anything about Dad having investments." "That's because I don't think they're real," I said with convincing bewilderment. "Poor people like us don't have investments and dividends. I keep trying to explain to these lawyers that they must be confused." Dr. Richard's eyes gleamed with naked greed. "Mrs. Richardson, perhaps you should have these documents reviewed by someone with financial experience. Sometimes widows don't realize the value of assets their husbands left behind." "Oh, would you?" I asked with apparent relief. I've been so worried about signing something incorrectly. Just today, someone called about something called a portfolio rebalancing and tax liability assessments. I told them they had the wrong number. Catherine practically purred with anticipation. Of course we'd be happy to help. Financial management is somewhat of a family specialty. Trevor abandoned all pretense of focusing on Jake's documents. "Mrs. Richardson, exactly how much money are we talking about here?" "Well, that's just it," I said with perfect confusion. "The numbers they mention don't make sense. Earlier today, someone called about $8 million, but that can't be right. People like me don't have millions of dollars. The reaction around the table was immediate and dramatic. Dr. Richard's fork clattered onto his plate. Catherine grabbed her husband's arm. Trevor's mouth literally fell open. Even Amanda looked stunned. Jake stared at me as if I had grown a second head. "Mom, what are you talking about?" $8 million. "Oh, honey, it's obviously some kind of mistake," I said dismissively. "I keep telling these people they have the wrong Minnie Richardson. Just because my husband had the same name as some rich man doesn't mean I inherited his money." Dr. Richard recovered first his medical training, allowing him to maintain composure under pressure. "Mrs. Richardson, I think you should take this very seriously. Estate lawyers don't typically make mistakes about beneficiaries." "But it doesn't make sense," I protested with convincing bewilderment. "My husband was an auto mechanic. He never mentioned having millions of dollars. If he did, why would we have lived in a tiny apartment and struggled to pay bills?" Catherine's mind was clearly racing with possibilities. Sometimes men keep financial information private to protect their families from tax complications or legal issues. Your husband may have been far wealthier than he let on. "Do you think so?" I asked with hopeful innocence. "That would certainly explain why all these lawyers and investment people keep calling me." Trevor was practically vibrating with excitement. "Mrs. Richardson, this could change everything for your family. And since we're all family now, we'd be happy to help you understand these financial matters." "That's so generous," I replied gratefully. "I've been feeling so overwhelmed by all the paperwork and legal terminology." Dr. Richard leaned forward with predatory intensity. "In fact, this makes our investment fund opportunity even more relevant. If you do indeed have significant assets to manage, you'll want to make sure they're invested wisely." "Oh my," I said, as if a light bulb had just turned on. "Do you think that's why the lawyer was asking about my son's family situation? He kept asking if I had children who might benefit from trust fund distributions." Jake looked completely overwhelmed. "Mom, I don't understand any of this. If Dad had money, why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't know," I said with perfect sincerity. "And I'm still not sure I believe it. Poor people don't suddenly become millionaires just because lawyers call them." Catherine's voice became honey-sweet with calculation. "Well, Mrs. Richardson, why don't we help you sort through all this confusion? Richard has extensive experience with financial planning, and Trevor works in investments." "Actually," Trevor corrected quickly, trying to maintain his cover story, "I work with high-net-worth clients all the time. Managing large inheritances is exactly what I do." Amanda shot her husband a look of pure panic, knowing full well that he had been fired for stealing from those very clients he claimed to serve. Dr. Richard's expression had transformed from condescending sympathy to intense concentration. "Mrs. Richardson, I think we should schedule a meeting tomorrow to review all your documentation. This family fund we discussed earlier could be the perfect vehicle for managing your inheritance." "Do you really think so?" I asked with touching gratitude. It would be such a relief to have people I trust helping me understand all this financial complexity. As I spoke, I noticed that the pressure on Jake to sign documents had completely disappeared. Instead, all three Worthingtons were focused entirely on me and the potential windfall I represented. Their carefully constructed scam had just gotten infinitely more complicated. But they had also revealed their true nature more completely than I could have hoped. Within minutes of learning about potential wealth, they had abandoned their son-in-law manipulation scheme and pivoted directly to targeting me. Their greed was so overwhelming that it overrode every other consideration. As Dr. Richard began outlining elaborate plans for helping me manage my inheritance, I realized that my poker face had just turned the tables completely. The hunters had become the hunted, and they didn't even realize it yet. Dr. Richard's transformation was remarkable to witness. The man who had been pressuring my son to sign loan documents 5 minutes earlier was now treating me with the reverent attention typically reserved for major donors at hospital fundraisers. Mrs. Richardson, I cannot emphasize strongly enough how important it is to handle inheritance documentation properly. One mistake could cost you hundreds of thousands in unnecessary taxes. Oh my goodness, I breathed with convincing anxiety. I never even thought about taxes. Do you think the government will want some of this money? Catherine leaned forward with the intensity of a hunting cat. That's exactly why you need proper financial guidance. Without the right planning, the IRS could take 40% or more of your inheritance. Trevor nodded emphatically momentarily, forgetting his own precarious legal situation. Estate planning is incredibly complex. You absolutely need professional help to navigate the regulations and optimize your tax position. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands as if overwhelmed by the magnitude of the situation. Maybe I should call that lawyer back. He said something about needing to make decisions by Friday, but I hung up because I thought it was a scam. Friday. Dr. Richards' voice took on urgent concern. Mrs. Richardson, if there are time-sensitive decisions involved, we cannot afford to delay. Financial opportunities have deadlines, and missing them can be catastrophic. Jake finally found his voice. Mom, this is all happening too fast. Maybe we should slow down and think about this carefully. Jake. Catherine said sharply, your mother is potentially facing the most important financial decisions of her lifetime. Hesitation could cost her millions. But we don't even know if any of this is real, Sarah interjected quietly. Shouldn't we verify the information before making any major decisions? Trevor waved her concerns away dismissively. Sarah, verification is exactly what we're offering to provide. Mrs. Richardson needs experts who can review documentation and guide her through the process. Dr. Richard pulled out his business card with flourish. Mrs. Richardson, I'm going to give you my personal cell phone number. I want you to call me immediately if any lawyers or financial advisors try to pressure you into making hasty decisions. I accepted the card with trembling hands. You're all being so kind. I feel terrible that I've been complaining about money troubles when I might actually be wealthy. You must think I'm terribly foolish. Not at all, Catherine assured me with false warmth. Complex financial situations can be overwhelming for anyone. That's why families need to support each other through these challenges. Amanda had remained silent throughout this exchange, but I noticed her growing distress. She kept glancing between her husband and his parents with obvious alarm, apparently realizing that their greed was leading them into dangerous territory. My phone rang suddenly, startling everyone at the table. I looked at the display with apparent confusion. Oh dear, it's that lawyer again. I probably shouldn't answer it. Actually, Dr. Richard said quickly, perhaps you should. We could listen in and help you understand what he's saying. I answered the call on speakerphone, having arranged this performance with my attorney beforehand. Hello, Mrs. Richardson. James's professional voice filled the space around our table. I apologize for calling so late, but we have some urgent developments regarding your inheritance settlement. Oh, hello, I said nervously. I'm actually at dinner with my family right now. Could this wait until tomorrow? I'm afraid not, James replied with practiced urgency. We've received preliminary approval for the asset transfer, but we need your decisions on several investment vehicles by 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. The estate is valued at approximately $8.7 million, and the tax implications of different distribution methods vary significantly. Dr. Richard's eyes widened and he gestured frantically for me to stay on the line. Catherine gripped her husband's arm so tightly I could see her knuckles turning white. Investment vehicles, I asked with convincing confusion. I don't understand what that means. James continued his performance flawlessly. Mrs. Richardson, you have several options for how to receive these assets. Direct distribution would result in substantial tax penalties, but we could establish trust funds, investment partnerships, or family foundation structures that would minimize your tax burden. Trevor leaned toward the phone eagerly. Excuse me, counselor, but Mrs. Richardson is with family members who have financial expertise. Would it be appropriate for us to assist her in understanding these options? Certainly, James replied smoothly. Financial planning is always better with qualified advisors. Are you working with registered investment professionals? Dr. Richard answered immediately. I'm Dr. Richard Worthington, and my son Trevor is an investment specialist. We'd be happy to help Mrs. Richardson navigate these complex decisions. Excellent, Dr. Worthington. Are you familiar with family limited partnerships and charitable remainder trusts as estate planning vehicles? I watched Dr. Richard's face carefully as he struggled to respond to financial terminology he clearly didn't understand. Of course, but perhaps we should schedule a formal meeting to review all the documentation properly. Time is unfortunately a factor. James pressed. The estate executors are requiring final decisions by Friday afternoon. Mrs. Richardson, I strongly recommend that you review all documentation with your advisors tomorrow morning. Oh, what kind of documentation? Catherine asked, her voice tight with barely controlled excitement. James launched into a detailed explanation of trust agreements, investment portfolios, and tax planning strategies that left the entire Worthington family looking overwhelmed, but determined not to admit their ignorance. After ending the call, Dr. Richard immediately took charge of the situation. Mrs. Richardson, this is far more complex than we initially realized. I'm going to cancel my appointments tomorrow morning so we can review everything properly. Would you really do that? I asked with grateful tears in my eyes. I feel so lost with all this legal language. Of course, Catherine said warmly, though I could see the calculating greed behind her expression. Family takes care of family. Trevor was practically bouncing in his seat with excitement. Mrs. Richardson, our investment fund could be the perfect vehicle for managing part of your inheritance. Instead of paying management fees to some impersonal investment company, you could work directly with family members who have your best interests at heart. That sounds wonderful, I agreed enthusiastically. How much do you think I should put into the family fund? The question hung in the air like an invitation to financial murder. Dr. Richard's eyes gleamed as he considered the possibilities. Well, diversification is important, but given the size of your inheritance, we could certainly manage several $1 million through our family partnership. Several million, I repeated with awe. You really think I could trust you with that much money? Catherine reached across the table to pat my hand maternally. Mrs. Richardson, we're not just talking about money anymore. We're talking about securing your future and creating opportunities for the next generation. Jake and Sarah's children will benefit from your wise decisions today. Sarah looked increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. I just think everyone should slow down and make sure we understand everything before making any major commitments. Sarah's right. Jake agreed, though he seemed overwhelmed by the magnitude of what we were discussing. Mom, maybe you should get a second opinion from someone who isn't family. Dr. Richard's expression hardened slightly. Jake, I hope you're not suggesting that we don't have Mrs. Richardson's best interests at heart. Of course not, Jake said quickly. I just think $8 million is a lot of money and we should be extra careful. Trevor leaned forward aggressively. Jake, careful is exactly what we're offering. Do you really want your mother working with strangers who don't care about her well-being? As the conversation continued, I noticed that Jake's loan documents had been completely forgotten. The pressure to sign investment agreements had evaporated the moment the Worthingtons realized they might be able to access millions instead of thousands. Amanda finally spoke up quietly. Maybe we should all take some time to think about this. These kinds of decisions shouldn't be rushed. Catherine shot her daughter-in-law a sharp look. Amanda, dear, sometimes opportunities require decisive action. Hesitation is how people miss life-changing possibilities. Dr. Richard checked his expensive watch. Mrs. Richardson, why don't you come to our house tomorrow morning at 9? We can review all your documentation in a comfortable, private setting. That would be perfect, I agreed readily. Should I bring all the paperwork the lawyer mentioned? Absolutely everything, Trevor said eagerly. Bank statements, investment accounts, insurance policies, everything related to your financial situation. As we prepared to leave the restaurant, I could see the excitement and greed written clearly on the Worthington family's faces. They thought they had just discovered the perfect victim, a confused widow with millions of dollars and no understanding of financial matters. But they had actually just walked into a carefully constructed trap. Tomorrow morning, they would reveal the full extent of their criminal intentions, and I would be ready with documentation, witnesses, and legal representation to ensure they faced the consequences of their actions. As Dr. Richard insisted on paying for dinner with a credit card that I suspected was close to its limit, I realized that the quiet before the storm was almost over. Tomorrow would bring the revelation that would destroy their family's criminal enterprise and save my son's future. I arrived at the Worthington house the next morning carrying a briefcase filled with carefully prepared documents. The house itself was impressive from the outside, a large colonial-style home in an upscale neighborhood, but I noticed several subtle signs of financial distress. The landscaping was overgrown, the driveway needed repairs, and the windows hadn't been professionally cleaned in months. Catherine answered the door wearing an outfit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, but I could see the stress lines around her eyes that expensive makeup couldn't quite conceal. "Mrs. Richardson, please come in. We're so excited to help you with this wonderful opportunity." The living room was elegantly furnished, but felt hollow somehow, as if the expensive pieces were more for show than comfort. Dr. Richard stood up from behind a mahogany desk that was covered with official-looking documents and financial calculators. "Minnie, thank you for trusting us with such important decisions," he said with practiced sincerity. "Trevor will be joining us shortly. He's just finishing up some urgent client business." I settled into the indicated chair and opened my briefcase with trembling hands. "I brought everything like you asked, but I'm still so confused by most of it. The lawyer used so many technical terms that I couldn't follow." Catherine moved closer with predatory interest. "Don't worry about the technical language. That's exactly why you need experienced advisors to protect your interests." Trevor entered the room a few minutes later looking slightly disheveled, but trying to project professional confidence. "Sorry for the delay. I was handling some urgent portfolio adjustments for another client." The lie rolled off his tongue with practiced ease. "Now then." Dr. Richard began settling into his chair with authoritative presence. "Let's review your inheritance documentation so we can develop an optimal strategy." I fumbled through my papers with apparent confusion. The lawyer gave me so many copies of things. There are bank statements, investment summaries, trust documents. I honestly don't know where to start. "Why don't you begin with the bank statements?" Trevor suggested eagerly. "Those will give us a clear picture of your immediate assets." I handed over carefully prepared documents that showed multiple high-balance accounts. The numbers were real, my actual financial statements, but I had removed identifying information that would reveal my true identity as Richardson Tech Solutions founder. Catherine's sharp intake of breath was audible as she scanned the figures. "Mrs. Richardson, these accounts show balances of over $6 million. This is extraordinary." "Is that good?" I asked with innocent hope. The banker who called said something about liquid assets, but I didn't understand what that meant. Dr. Richard's voice took on the reverent tone of someone discovering buried treasure. "Liquid assets mean money that's immediately available for investment opportunities. Mrs. Richardson, you're looking at financial freedom for the rest of your life." Trevor leaned forward with barely controlled excitement. "These investment accounts show incredible diversification. Technology stocks, real estate partnerships, international bonds. Your husband was clearly a sophisticated investor." "Was he?" I asked with touching wonder. "I never knew. He always said we needed to be careful with money, but I thought that meant we didn't have very much." Catherine placed a maternally protective hand on my shoulder. "Some men prefer to handle financial matters privately to avoid burdening their wives with complex decisions. Your husband was obviously protecting you from unnecessary stress. The important thing now," Dr. Richard continued, "is making sure these assets continue growing rather than sitting idle in low-yield accounts." I pulled out my phone as if responding to a call, but actually activated a recording app. "Oh dear, that's the lawyer again. He said he'd call this morning about those investment vehicle decisions. Answer it, Trevor urged. We're here to help you understand whatever he's explaining. I put the call on speakerphone and James's professional voice filled the room. Mrs. Richardson, good morning. I hope you're reviewing the documentation with your financial advisors as we discussed. Yes, I'm here with Dr. Worthington and his family. They're being so helpful in explaining things I don't understand. Excellent, James replied. Gentlemen, I assume you've reviewed the portfolio statements and trust documentation. Do you have questions about the inheritance structure or tax implications? Dr. Richard cleared his throat importantly. Counselor, we're still reviewing the specifics, but we're particularly interested in the family investment partnership options you mentioned yesterday. Ah, yes, the limited partnership structure. That can be an excellent vehicle for estate planning and tax optimization. Are you familiar with the regulatory requirements for managing other people's inherited assets? There was a moment of awkward silence before Trevor answered. Of course, but perhaps you could clarify the specific compliance standards for this type of arrangement. James's voice became more serious. Certainly. Any investment professional handling inherited assets must be properly licensed and bonded. They're also required to provide full disclosure of their own financial status and any potential conflicts of interest. Mrs. Richardson, have your advisors provided you with their compliance documentation? I looked around the room with apparent confusion. Compliance documentation, I don't think I've received anything like that. Dr. Richard's face flushed slightly. Well, we haven't formalized anything yet. We're still in the preliminary discussion phase. I understand, James replied smoothly. However, given the substantial amounts involved, I'd recommend verifying credentials before proceeding. Mrs. Richardson, you should request to see current licenses, bonding certificates, and financial disclosure statements from anyone you're considering as investment advisors. Catherine laughed nervously. That all sounds very formal for a family arrangement. Mrs. Worthington, I appreciate that this feels like a family matter, but legally speaking, managing someone else's $8 million inheritance carries significant fiduciary responsibilities. Unlicensed investment advice involving these amounts could constitute criminal fraud under federal law. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Trevor's face went pale, and Dr. Richard began shuffling papers nervously. Criminal fraud, I repeated with alarm. Oh my goodness, I don't want anyone to get in trouble for helping me. Mrs. Richardson legitimate financial advisors welcome regulatory oversight because it protects both them and their clients, James explained patiently. I'm simply suggesting you verify that anyone handling your assets meets professional standards. After ending the call, an uncomfortable silence settled over the room. Finally, Dr. Richard attempted to regain control of the situation. Many don't let legal technicalities frighten you away from good financial opportunities. Lawyers are always overly cautious about regulations. But he mentioned criminal charges, I said with growing anxiety. I couldn't bear the thought of my financial decisions hurting people who are just trying to help me. Trevor jumped in desperately. Mrs. Richardson, we can easily provide any documentation you need. The important thing is not letting bureaucratic delays cost you investment opportunities. What kind of opportunities, I asked, maintaining my innocent curiosity while the trap closed around them. Catherine's greed overcame her caution. Well, our family investment fund could immediately put 2 or 3 million of your inheritance to work earning substantial returns. 2 or 3 million, I repeated breathlessly. That seems like so much money. Dr. Richard leaned forward with predatory intensity. Minnie, $2 million properly invested could earn you $400,000 per year in passive income. That's more than most people make working full-time. And the beauty of working with family, Trevor added, is that you don't have to pay the enormous management fees that traditional investment companies charge. As they continued outlining their scheme, I noticed several crucial admissions that would be valuable evidence. They were promising specific returns without any legitimate basis, pressuring me to move large sums immediately and explicitly, avoiding regulatory oversight that would protect my assets. My phone buzzed with a text from Helen, my private investigator. Documentation complete. They've run this exact scam on 4 other families. Police and FBI are standing by. I looked up from my phone with sudden confusion. I'm sorry, but I'm getting very worried about something. My caseworker just sent me a message about some kind of investigation. Dr. Richard's expression sharpened with alarm. What kind of investigation? Something about investment fraud involving family members, I read from my phone. Apparently, there have been complaints about people taking advantage of inheritance situations. Catherine forced a laugh that sounded strained. Well, that certainly doesn't apply to us. We're legitimate financial professionals. Are you really? I asked with touching hope. Because the caseworker is asking for verification of licenses and credentials for anyone I'm considering working with. Trevor's voice became defensive. Mrs. Richardson, if you don't trust us to help you, perhaps you should work with strangers instead. Oh no, I said quickly. I want to trust you. You've all been so kind. It's just that $8 million feels like such an enormous responsibility. Dr. Richard stood up abruptly. Minnie, I think we need to be very clear about something. Investment opportunities don't wait for people to overcome every small concern. If you're not ready to make decisive moves, you're going to miss chances that could change your life. I understand, I replied softly. But what if I make the wrong decision? What if I lose everything because I don't understand what I'm doing? Catherine's maternal facade cracked slightly. Mrs. Richardson, wealthy people don't get wealthy by being afraid of every possibility. Sometimes you have to trust the people who care about you. The pressure was building exactly as I had expected. Rather than addressing my legitimate concerns about verification and regulation, they were trying to manipulate me emotionally into making immediate financial commitments. Trevor pulled out several documents. Look, let's simplify this. Here are investment agreements for a family partnership that would immediately put $3 million of your inheritance to work. All you need to do is sign here and provide the account information. I stared at the papers with apparent overwhelm. $3 million, I whispered. That's so much money. It's money that could be earning you 12% returns starting next month, Dr. Richard pressed urgently, but only if you act decisively. As I reached for the pen they offered, I made my own decisive move. I calmly pulled out my real identification and placed it on the table, Minnie Richardson, CEO and founder of Richardson Tech Solutions. The transformation in their faces was immediate and devastating. Dr. Richard dropped his pen. Catherine's mouth fell open. Trevor actually stepped backward as if I had pulled out a weapon. I need to be completely honest with you, I said in a voice that no longer carried any trace of confusion or uncertainty. I've been testing your character, and you've failed spectacularly. Dr. Richard attempted to recover. I don't understand what you mean. I activated my phone's recording playback. Their own voices filled the room, promising guaranteed returns, pressuring for immediate decisions, and explicitly avoiding regulatory oversight. I mean that you've spent the last 18 hours trying to defraud me out of millions of dollars. Catherine's face went white. This is some kind of misunderstanding. No misunderstanding, I replied calmly. I know about your bankruptcies, your gambling debts, Trevor's embezzlement charges, and the 4 other families you've scammed with this same investment fund scheme. Trevor made a move toward the door, but I held up my hand. I wouldn't recommend leaving. My attorney is in the driveway with documentation of everything you've done, and the police are waiting for my signal. As the full magnitude of their situation sank in, the Worthington family realized that their carefully planned scam had collapsed completely. The confused widow they thought they were manipulating was actually the architect of their destruction. The trap had been sprung and there was no escape. Dr. Richard slumped into his chair as the weight of his situation became clear. How long have you known? He asked quietly, his authoritative medical persona completely evaporated. I suspected something was wrong the moment you started pressuring my son for $50,000 he doesn't have, I replied evenly. but I confirmed it when I had you all investigated yesterday evening." Catherine's hands shook as she reached for her coffee cup. "What exactly do you think you can prove?" I opened my briefcase and pulled out a thick folder compiled by Helen and my legal team. "Insurance fraud at your medical practice, Richard. Gambling debts totaling $67,000, Catherine. Embezzlement charges pending against Trevor, and documentation of at least 4 other families you've defrauded with this exact same investment scheme." Trevor finally found his voice. "You can't prove any of that." "Actually, I can." I activated my phone and James Patterson's voice came through clearly. "Good morning, Dr. Worthington. This is James Patterson, Mrs. Richardson's attorney. I'm currently sitting in your driveway with Detective Morrison from the Financial Crimes Unit." Dr. Richards' face went ashen. "Detective Morrison." "Dr. Worthington, we've been investigating reports of investment fraud involving your family for several months. Mrs. Richardson's evidence has provided the final pieces we needed for criminal charges." Catherine began crying softly. "We never meant for things to go this far. We were just trying to solve some temporary financial problems." "Temporary?" I asked incredulously. "You've been running this scam for over 2 years. Amanda's parents lost their entire retirement savings because of your temporary problems." At the mention of Amanda's parents, Trevor's defiance crumbled. "How do you know about them?" "Because Amanda told me everything yesterday," I replied. "She's been living in terror watching you destroy family after family while threatening to abandon her and your unborn child if she didn't support your lies." Just then, Jake and Sarah entered the house, having been summoned by my text message. They stopped short when they saw the scene, the scattered financial documents, the tears, and the obvious tension in the room. "Mom," Jake said uncertainly. "What's going on here? Sarah said you needed us to come here urgently." I stood up and embraced my son. "Jake, I need you to know that everything your in-laws told you yesterday was a lie. There is no family investment fund. They're deeply in debt and facing criminal charges for financial fraud." Sarah looked stunned. "What do you mean, criminal charges?" Detective Morrison entered the house at that moment, his presence making everything official and final. "Sarah Worthington, I'm sorry you have to learn about this situation like this, but your family has been running an investment scam targeting relatives and in-laws." "That's not possible," Sarah protested weakly, though I could see in her eyes that pieces were falling into place. Dr. Richard made one last attempt at manipulation. "Sarah, sweetie, this is all a terrible misunderstanding. Your mother and I were simply trying to help Mrs. Richardson understand her financial options. By pressuring her to invest $3 million in a non-existent fund," Detective Morrison asked dryly, "Dr. Worthington, we have recordings of you promising guaranteed returns and explicitly avoiding regulatory oversight." Trevor suddenly became aggressive. "You entrapped us. You lied about who you were." "I tested your character," I corrected firmly, "and you revealed that you're willing to destroy your own daughter's marriage to steal money from her husband." Catherine looked up through her tears. "We love Sarah. We would never hurt her intentionally. You were planning to take $50,000 from Jake and Sarah's house savings account," I replied coldly. "Money they've been saving for 2 years to build their life together. How is that not hurting her so up?" Sarah finally spoke, her voice small and broken. "Is it true? Have you really been lying to me about our finances?" Dr. Richard couldn't meet his daughter's eyes. "Sweetheart, we've been going through some difficult times, but we never wanted you to worry." "Difficult times." Detective Morrison consulted his notes. "Dr. Worthington, your medical practice has been under federal investigation for insurance fraud for 8 months. Mrs. Worthington has accumulated gambling debts of over $60,000, and Mr. Trevor Worthington was terminated for embezzling client funds." Jake put his arm protectively around Sarah as she began to sob. "Sarah, I'm so sorry you're going through this." "Jake doesn't need to apologize," I said firmly. "He's not responsible for other people's criminal behavior." Amanda appeared in the doorway holding a small suitcase. "I'm sorry," she said quietly to Sarah. "I tried to warn Mrs. Richardson yesterday, but I was too scared to tell you directly." Trevor turned on his wife angrily. "Amanda, how could you betray the family like this?" "How could I betray the family?" Amanda shot back with surprising strength. "You've been stealing money and lying to everyone who loves you. I'm not going to watch you destroy Sarah's life the way you destroyed my parents." Detective Morrison stepped forward. "Dr. Richard Worthington, Catherine Worthington and Trevor Worthington, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, investment fraud, and theft by deception." As the handcuffs were applied, Catherine looked at me with desperate pleading. "Mrs. Richardson, surely we can work something out. We're Sarah's family." "Sarah's real family is the people who love her enough to tell her the truth," I replied. "And that includes my son, who was willing to go into debt to try to help you." After the police had taken the 3 family members away, Sarah sat in stunned silence, while Amanda packed the few belongings she wanted to take from the house. The mortgage company would be foreclosing within weeks. "Sarah," I said gently, "I know this is overwhelming, but I want you to know that Jake and I are here to support you." "I don't understand how I never saw this," Sarah whispered. "How could my own parents lie to me for so long?" Jake held her closer. "Because you trusted them. There's nothing wrong with trusting the people who are supposed to love you. But now what happens? Where will I live? What about our wedding plans?" I smiled warmly. "Well, that's actually the good news part of this story. I'd like to offer you and Jake a real wedding gift." I pulled out a set of house keys and placed them in Sarah's hands. "There's a beautiful 3-bedroom house about 15 minutes from here that just became available. It has a garden, a good school district for future children, and it's completely paid for." Jake stared at the keys in amazement. "Mom, we can't accept something like that." "Actually, you can," I replied firmly, "because it's not charity. It's an investment in my son's happiness and my future daughter-in-law's healing." Sarah looked up with tears streaming down her face. "Why would you do this for me after what my family tried to do to you?" "Because you're not responsible for their choices," I said simply. "And because you defended me at dinner when they were being condescending. You showed kindness to someone you thought was struggling, and that tells me everything I need to know about your character." Amanda approached hesitantly. "Mrs. Richardson, I don't know what I'm going to do now. I don't have anywhere to go." "Actually, you do," I replied. "The house has 3 bedrooms. One for Jake and Sarah, one for guests, and one for a single mother who needs time to build a new life for herself and her baby." Amanda's tears of relief were audible. "I don't know how to thank you." "Thank me by being the kind of mother to your child that they deserve. Break the cycle of manipulation and greed that's been destroying your family." 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of the house I had given to Jake and Sarah, watching them prepare dinner together. Sarah was enrolled in graduate school pursuing her master's degree in education, fully funded through a scholarship program I had quietly established. Jake had been promoted at work and was taking evening classes in financial planning. Amanda had given birth to a healthy daughter and was working as a bookkeeper while taking online courses in accounting. She had testified against Trevor, Dr. Richard, and Catherine, helping to ensure they received appropriate sentences for their crimes. The Worthington parents each received 3 years in federal prison for investment fraud and conspiracy. Trevor received 5 years due to his previous embezzlement conviction. All 3 were ordered to pay restitution to their victims, though their financial assets were insufficient to cover the full damages. Grandma Minnie, Sarah, called from the kitchen using the name she had chosen for me, "Dinner's Ready." As we sat around the table together, I reflected on the lessons learned from this entire experience. Sarah had grown stronger and more confident, no longer carrying shame about her family's background. Jake had learned to recognize manipulation and stand up for the people he loved. Amanda had discovered she was capable of protecting her child and building an independent life. "I have an announcement," Sarah said during dessert. "Jake and I have been talking, and we've decided to start a financial literacy program for young couples. We want to help people recognize investment scams and make informed decisions about their money." "That's wonderful," I replied warmly. "I'd be happy to fund the program and provide educational materials." Jake raised his wine glass. "To family," he said simply. the kind you choose and the kind that chooses to love you. As we toasted, I thought about the twisted irony of the situation. The Worthington family's greed had led them to target me, specifically because they thought I was vulnerable and powerless. In their minds, a poor, confused widow was the perfect victim for their financial scam. Instead, they had encountered someone with the resources and determination to protect not just myself, but also the innocent family members caught in their web of lies. Their attempt to exploit vulnerability had ultimately exposed their own moral bankruptcy. The greatest wealth I had discovered through this ordeal wasn't the millions in my investment accounts. It was the knowledge that my son had chosen a wife with genuine kindness and integrity, and that together they were building a relationship based on honesty, mutual support, and shared values. Money can reveal character, but it doesn't create it. I had learned that people who truly love you will value your heart over your wallet. But sometimes you have to let people show you who they really are before you can protect the people you love most. As I watched Jake and Sarah planning their future together with Amanda playing happily with her daughter in the living room, I realized that the best revenge against people who try to destroy families is to build something stronger and more beautiful than they could ever imagine. The story that began with a test of character had ended with the triumph of genuine love over calculated greed, and that I reflected was worth more than all the money in the world. I'd love to hear from all of you watching this story. Have you ever had to test someone's character when you suspected their motives weren't genuine? How did you handle a situation where someone tried to take advantage of your family? Share your experiences in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed seeing justice served. Subscribe for more stories about family drama, financial schemes, and the power of standing up for what's right. And please share this story with anyone who might benefit from learning about these kinds of investment scams. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope this story reminds you that sometimes the best way to protect the people you love is to be brave enough to reveal the truth, no matter how difficult it might be.